Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. Almost the end of the week. Just kind of reading up on the chat here. About 5 more weeks to go. So you're getting there. Yeah, hopefully things are still going pretty easy for the term. Do you guys have classes on Friday, or is this your last class of the week now? I know the schedules kind of are always a little different in the last stretch. Oh, okay, so you do have a class on Fridays. Shucks. I thought this was an early week for you guys, so I was gonna celebrate vicariously through you, but that's okay. All right. So I know there's still a few folks kind of trickling in. That's okay. That is why sessions are recorded. So there we go. Okay. I will start things off as per usual, just talking about our agenda, just to make sure that we're all on the same page. This is, we didn't, of course, meet last class, so we'll just kind of start things off on the right foot again. All right, and chat box is open, so if you guys have any questions, comments, or want to keep talking about your courses this year, go ahead. So for today, very similar structure to how we did it in the first half of the course. Have your textbook or your notes handy. We're going to be going through chapter terminology and concepts. So also a reminder, it's Thursday. So if you are completing the discussion board posts, those are due by 11:30 p.m. tonight, both the post and the reply. Uh, Same thing as last time, 200 words plus or minus 25. You can post and reply as much as you want. I'll just be looking for your two most substantial items to give you the most marks as possible. So we're now also entering the second half of our course, which is chapters 9 through 15. The final test, the final exam, whatever you want to call it, it's only going to cover these chapters, so 9 through 15. It is not cumulative. Now, that's not saying you can totally ignore everything that we just learned and chuck it out of the brain, but instead you can just shift your focus for how you study into the next half of this course. So now you can really focus on 9 through 15. All right, so that being said, we're going to review chapters 9 and 10, get things started. And then I'm going to talk about the alternative assignment, which information was provided about it last week, so just after your midterm or your test. I know there's already been quite a few discussion board posts already made, so we'll just kind of chat about that. Um, Based on how long that discussion takes, there probably won't be time for a case study discussion today. I really don't want things to be rushed. If we happen to fly through it, there's no questions at all, then we can look at doing a case study together. But if not, we'll pick those case studies back up next week. So just want to make sure there's lots of time for questions and answer opportunities. All right, fantastic. So without further ado, then why don't we get started right into chapter 9? So have those textbooks or notes handy. And I lied. Just before we get started into this, why don't we do our poll? I know quite a few of you like that weekly poll. So same thing, what is the most desirable supervisory trait? I will open that now, and there'll be 5 minutes to answer. So your options this week are dependable, resourceful, timely, trailblazer, committed, or bold. So cast your votes, and after chapter 9, we'll see which one wins for the week. And yeah, there's already a few answers pouring in, so great. All right, chapter 9, all about organizing. There we go. Just give it a moment. My computer's been a little sluggish this week, so. All right, fantastic. So when we're talking about organization, organization is any group structured by management that carries out a designated function to accomplish a specific objective. So when we think about organizing as well, think back to the functional management plan or the functional management theory. And that's where we talk about planning, organizing, staffing, leading, and controlling. So right now we're kind of in that second option there. So we've already talked about planning. Now we're talking about organizing. And very, very soon we're going to be talking about staffing components as well. So we're kind of getting into these next aspects. So the growing challenge, though, for management has become how do we organize to do more with less? And that's one of the biggest challenges. I mean, certainly with the pandemic, but in general, how do we have more profits with maybe less resources or less staff? How do we become more efficient, or how do we gain more clients with the same resources we have? Right? It's always about how do we do more or accomplish more with less. And it comes with effective organization. The challenge can be, though, when we're talking about organization, is if supervisors rely too heavily on one employee or a few select star employees, a department can become fundamentally weaker because those top performers maybe they call in sick one day, or they take promotions and they leave their role, or simply leave the organization. So the principle of organizational stability says that no organization should become overly dependent on one or just a few several key players. Instead, you need to kind of spread out your interest and your development across all of your staff members so that your organization doesn't depend solely on a couple individuals. And yes, every company will always sort of have their star performers that can often help sort of run the team or help guide the team to success. But if a company recognizes that and they focus too heavily on those individuals, they can inadvertently become much weaker in case something happens to those staff members. So informal gatherings as well, the chapter talks in quite a bit of length about informal gatherings, very similar to the concept of informal communication. So when we talked about there's four primary channels of communication, formal, informal, which is the grapevine, body language, and web and social networks. So just like the grapevine or the informal communication, which supervisors cannot stop from happening, same thing with these informal gatherings of this organization. So these are people outside of formal work structures and they get together. Every organization is affected by this social subsystem. Supervisors cannot stop it from happening. They can make the supervisor's job more easier or more difficult, depending on the peer influence and the attitudes of that group. So to put that into context, think it's a Friday after work and you guys just want to get together, a couple buddies or friends from work, maybe go to a patio for some drinks or food, whatever the case might be. Very, very common. And depending on the attitude and the perspective of that group, it can just be a sense of camaraderie and employees sort of bonding together. Or if it's a group of employees who maybe really dislike certain supervisors or employees or procedures at work, that negativity can sort of fester and it gets worse and worse. And then it will, of course, spill into the workplace as well, because now you have a group of like minded individuals kind of bouncing this negativity off of each other. So that's what it means when it can make a job more easier if it's positive camaraderie, or more difficult through negative aspects. So if an informal group is negatively affecting employees and potentially departmental productivity, a supervisor might have to distribute work or adjust working schedules to try in any attempt to maybe break up these informal gatherings. While it's not going to be 100% effective, a supervisor may have to intervene just to try to maybe spread out the negativity or prevent it from sort of all congregating in one place. So let's go through a few different terminologies of this chapter. Let's start with unity of command. And I know this first one might always take a little bit of time, but that's okay. What is unity of command? Report to one supervisor only. Yes, thank you. So it's a principle that suggests that each employee should report only to one supervisor. And that is a fantastic theory. It's a fantastic concept. It would really streamline communication, but practically speaking, it just doesn't happen, or at least not all the time. Quite often, especially as you're a more junior staff member, you may be helping on multiple projects or different aspects of multiple projects. So you will be reporting to multiple different supervisors. And that's where the level of organization from not just the employee, but from supervisors, they need to be aware of that and where their resources are being pulled in different directions to make sure that there's no mishap of communication. Span of management. What's the next one? All right, upper limit, thank you. Upper limit to the number of subordinates a supervisor can manage effectively. Exactly. So the span of management usually increases the lower the person is on the managerial hierarchy. So what that's saying is if you are a more entry-level supervisor or junior level manager, chances are you can oversee more staff because your role in the organization is less complex. Maybe you're carrying out more basic functions. But as you go up the managerial hierarchy, chances are you're looking more at portfolios or more complex aspects or strategic planning of the company. So because your work is more complex in nature, you can't oversee 25 individuals anymore, maybe 30, whatever the case is. Maybe it's now only 5 or 10. Good. Specialized staff assistants. This might be a little bit of a trickier one. Okay. Delegation of duties. Good. Yeah, I'm going to definitely expand on that one. So thank you, Pavel. So specialized staff assistance, it's one of the factors influencing span of supervision, right? So the span of supervision says you can have how many, like the upper limit that management can effectively supervise. Specialized staff assistance is one of those factors. So in this case, it's saying it's using human resources as an example. So let's say the HR department assists in the recruiting, the staffing, the training of new employees. That way, the supervisor has more time for departmental activities and potentially taking on more employees as well. So if a manager had to also focus on all of the recruiting aspects, the training, and whatever the case might be, maybe their span of management has to decrease. So specialized staff assistants can assist in increasing or certainly maintaining the span. All right, good. And lead person. What is lead person? All right, we got quite a few in here quickly. So employees in charge of other employees who perform limited managerial functions, but not considered part of management. That's exactly what it is. So thinking back maybe to our, often used fast food or quick order restaurants, McDonald's. If anyone's worked at McDonald's, you typically start as a crew person, then your next option is crew trainer, followed by team leader. And so these are all different roles. They usually come with a bit of a wage increase, but certainly more responsibilities, right? You're now more entrusted with training, with supervising, with helping with the organizational components of the business. But by no means are you part of the management team. You're still part of the crew team or the employee base. So individual, limited managerial functions to help out the supervisor, but not part of the management team. Fantastic. All right, there was also a few last sort of definitions in here I want to clarify because I know it can be easy to trip them up. So let's start with line authority. What is line authority? So the right to direct others. Yeah, that's exactly it. Thank you. So the right to direct others and require them to conform to decisions, policies, rules, objectives. Think about it like your immediate supervisor, your immediate boss. They have the right to direct you and require you to follow directions and follow policies and rules. So how about staff authority? What would staff authority be? All right, thank you. Exactly. The right to provide counsel, advice, support, and service in a person's area of expertise. So, for example, and I'm going to build off the example the textbook provides. So, HR could be a situation where they're a staff authority. So, HR is providing their counsel or their expertise in screening candidates for another department's hire. So, let's say the transportation department is hiring a new technologist. HR doesn't necessarily have departmental knowledge on transportation, but they can provide advice and support and at least HR expertise of screening candidates, right? Once they know what the qualifications and the job descriptions are and the job specifications. So that's sort of the difference is you have the line authority, the immediate sort of supervisor or the right to direct others, and staff authority is the right to provide counsel or advice. And that can certainly flip the other way around. So again, let's say we're hiring an individual for transportation. Let's say HR has the right to set up the job ads, right? They're posting it, they're screening it, but perhaps the transportation department has to provide counsel based on their area of expertise, right? They know the different types of skills and attributes that are needed. So it's just one has the right to direct, one is the right to provide counsel. So let's finish it up here. I know I'm dragging this out. So line and staff organizational structure, sort of combining the two aspects. What is that? Line and staff type organizational structure. So it might be a harder one to find. It might be buried in the text. Okay, here we go. So structure that combines line and staff departments and incorporates line and staff authority. Yes, that's exactly it. So an example here is staff supervisors requesting adherence to a policy and line supervisors upholding it with employees. So let's say HR comes out with a new policy, well, okay, easy one, anti-harassment policy, okay? HR developed it, so they're maybe the staff supervisors, and they're requesting that the line authority or the line supervisors uphold it with their employees because they're the ones who also have the right to direct others, the right to conform others to follow rules and policies. So, like I said, I know sort of when reading through the chapter, it might be weird to differentiate between those concepts. So I just wanted to give it a little bit more context to further elaborate on it. So thank you. All right, near the end of the chapter, we'd also talk about downsizing. And I know that concept has come up a couple times throughout this textbook already. Um, but it's an important aspect to talk about because it affects the company in so many different ways, not just, of course, financially, but employee morale, engagement, and certainly production. So downsizing or restructuring, it's an unfortunate reality that some organizations have to face. And there can be many alternatives to downsizing. So, reducing employees, for the most part, should be a last resort. There can be a few unique scenarios where reducing an employee workforce might be the most beneficial, but by and large, you should look at other alternatives within your team, within your company, before immediately getting people off of the payroll. Things can include freezing salaries. And again, none of these will be a best case scenario, but many employees will agree that these options may be better than just termination. So freezing salaries, cutting or severely restricting overtime, terminate temporary staff. So those are staff that are already only working on contract. Reevaluate the necessary business trips, postpone or cancel bonuses, and even collaborate with suppliers or competitors, customers, whatever the case might be. An example of collaborating with competitors could include, if we think back to kind of a little bit earlier in the pandemic, where I believe a lot of the exchange district businesses, so the restaurants, were really also hard hit. I mean, every restaurant was, but just because all of the downtown core businesses, everyone was working from home, and a lot of them still are. So a lot of the exchange district restaurants came together through one platform to encourage more direct delivery and sort of not necessarily catering options, but more direct ways to reach customers through just one single platform, as opposed to customers maybe reaching out to each one on their own. And this platform, so it's competitors coming together to as an alternative to immediate downsizing, right? So closing the doors, but they came together and of course the response was overwhelming. This platform and this kind of company couldn't keep up with demand, at least for the first little bit for sure. So that's just an example of collaborating with your suppliers, with your competitors to try to figure out a unique way to respond to business. And perfect. So here, and there's a comment here, living in an RV park. So sorry, I might not know what that is. That an alternative to downsizing, living in an RV park, Pavel? That's funny. There we go. Yeah. So yeah, maybe downsizing your home could be an option, right? If you've got a really fancy home, maybe you could look at options as well, or maybe move the business to a slightly cheaper destination. All right. So I also found this image here, which shows some direct and indirect costs of downsizing. So when you lay off staff, or when you terminate staff, I should say, there are some direct costs that are sort of immediately known and often immediately felt. Things like severance pay in lieu of notice, accrued vacation and sick time, so that may have to be paid out, supplemental unemployment benefits, outplacement, pension and benefits payouts, administrative processing costs, so all the paperwork that goes with terminating employees, and costs potentially of rehiring former employees. So that's sort of the immediate and known costs. But then there can be indirect costs that sort of follow after. That could be recruiting and employment costs of new hires, right? So say the business picks back up again. Now you have to go through the process of the recruiting phase, which is not cheap. Low morale or risk averse survivors. So let's say you have a select employees who weren't terminated, but chances are their morale is just through the floor. It's really low, and they're going to be really hard pressed to want to take risk or to push the envelope for innovation at the workplace because chances are they're worried about their jobs. So if they're even sticking around, they're going to want to just really keep their head down and their morale is going to be really bad. Decreased productivity, increase in unemployment tax rate, lack of staff when economy rebounds. So startup costs, which again associated with recruiting, training, and staffing. Voluntary terminations from those who remain. So again, that's tied in with that poor employee engagement and morale. Chances are they might feel that they're next on the chopping block, so they may move to another company. Opportunity costs of lost sales, potential lawsuits from aggrieved employees, potential strikes by unions in some countries, loss of institutional memory and trust in management, and brand equity cost, so damage to the company's brand as an employer of choice. And again, downsizing, sometimes it's necessary. It's a necessary evil in certain circumstances. This was just highlighting that there are alternatives to terminating employees, whether it's that freezing salaries or going to an RV park, right? There's options out there. But what it is saying is that there can be quite a few costs associated with it. So if your company has to make that choice, then be aware of sort of the repercussions of letting employees go. Good. So that was a quick overview of Chapter 9. And just before Chapter 10, why don't I release those survey results? So it looks like Dependable won by quite a landslide this week. So thank you for those who casted their votes. You should see the results, but fantastic. Thank you very much, guys. All right, Chapter 10, Empowering Employees for Success. So when we're talking about HR, there's human resources and like a human resource department. We're kind of going to talk about the differences between the two. So regardless of size, every organization is affected by human resource issues. Human resource issues are complaints or grievances, issues you have with a coworker or a boss. Those are human resource issues. Maybe your working conditions are not safe and you need to talk to somebody. Human resources. So the organization needs to have some level of human resources in order and utilize them effectively in order to address these issues. So many firms, not all of them, have developed HR, so human resource departments, to facilitate these activities. So let's say you work with a company, they have a dedicated HR department. Chances are those can be some individuals you can go to perhaps confidently and um, sort of anonymously to air some challenges or grievances, right, with a boss or a coworker or working conditions. Now, if you work at a company that does not have a dedicated HR department, and those certainly do exist, maybe it is just your boss or your boss's boss. That's the HR person. Um, and there's definitely pros and cons to both methods. I think one of the main challenges is if you work with a company that doesn't have a dedicated HR team, sometimes some of the paperwork can be delayed in certain circumstances, right? HR, one of their core duties is making sure that filing and paperwork everything is caught up to date and accurate. But also they can act as sort of a removed body if you have a concern with another employee. So let's say if you have a concern with your boss and your boss is a guy who handles all of the complaints, that can be sort of an awkward position to be in. But again, pros and cons to both. The hiring process, and this is where we're going to talk more in depth about the hiring process in this chapter, can be a challenging part of the supervisory process or supervisory requirement. So you want to hire, of course, the most qualified candidate while remaining efficient, impartial, and legally compliant, right? So you don't want any discriminatory aspects in a job description. So involve those who will be working closely with the applicant in order to provide input on the selection process. So, for example, I just before I kind of left Dillon Consulting, they were showing me some previous job ads, I guess, that were out or going to be coming out soon, and it was the exact same, like it was my position essentially. It's like a field environmental technologist, and it was the exact same job ad that I had used when I applied for them as a co-op position. And so they said, "Hey, can you quickly look over this? Any recommendations?" And definitely there was a lot of recommendations I had because it was quite evident that perhaps more of a project manager or someone maybe more removed from the role uh, didn't have some certain key aspects in that job where when I applied, there was quite a bit of a disparity between specifications, job description versus what I actually did. So the job ad read very much like an office position, right? Just a lot of analyzing, lab results and doing this and doing that, and a little bit of field work here and there. When in reality, the role was about 90% field work, which was still fine. It was fun, and I got to do a lot of cool things. But there was just a big contrast of what the actual role is versus what they're sort of displaying it to be. And I think as many of you have already discussed on those on the discussion boards, the effective job descriptions, effective job specifications, make sure you get the right qualified candidates for a role. So whether you're including someone else to assist with the job descriptions, uh, or you're just developing it yourself, OUCH is a 4-letter acronym to ensure appropriate selection criteria is made. So O stands for objective, U is uniform in application, C is consistent in effort, and H has job relatedness. So you don't want to be asking specific questions that have nothing to do with the job. Chances are you may start falling into some discriminatory territory unknowingly, and you don't mean to. For example, it's you cannot ask a person's nationality during a job interview. So one thing that you might see quite frequently in a lot of job ads is, are you legally allowed or are you legally able to work in Canada? Yes or no, right? So that way it prevents discrimination from where an individual was born or what race or nationality potentially they may be of, but it just says, can you legally work in Canada? So yes, the employer knows that this individual is allowed to work in Canada, and they kind of avoid and bypass unnecessary information that would have nothing to do with job relatedness. So an organization can choose to hire an applicant externally, so outside of the organization, or internally, so from within your team. Hiring internally is often the preferred method when you can, and it sends two very clear messages. So there's a future for current employees within the company. They know there's growth. But then also, as that employee continues to learn more and they gain skills, there's always other opportunities waiting, right? So there's opportunities for them here or for them in other companies. There's an opportunity to grow. So if a major technological change or downsizing is anticipated, a replacement employee may not be needed. So again, while it's always beneficial to fill roles, let's say if you have a huge technology change coming in or you're implementing all this new software, maybe it replaces the need of a certain role. So then you wouldn't need to fill that gap anymore. All right, so let's go through some terminology for chapter 10. Let's start with orientation. What is orientation? And again, you can use the textbook answer or you can use the top of the brain answer, whichever. All right, so the process of smoothing the transition of new employees into the organization. Exactly. So it's all about that process of, pretty much maybe just before the first day or once they're hired and getting them transitioned into the company. And I don't know about you guys, but I know I have been in fantastic orientation scenarios where the transition is very smooth and it's clear that the company has a plan in place. Pardon me, and quite the opposite, where you show up your first day and pardon me, you're like a deer in headlights, right? You don't know where to go. Nobody's really there to tell you what to do or where to go. And it really sets a tone for the company as well. All right, competencies. What are competencies? Skills that the individual possesses. Yeah, so it's a set of skills, knowledge, and personal attributes possessed by a superior performer. And great, selection criteria. What is selection criteria? All right, so here we are, factors used to choose among applicants who apply for a job. Yes, thank you very much. So it's a factors used to differentiate between your applicants. And selection criteria can be in a variety of forms. So you can have application forms, perhaps you're comparing between education, that could be a factor, work experience, background checks. So maybe you have two excellent applicants, one passes a background check, one does not. That's a selection criteria. Or even the interview process. That is also a selection criteria method. All right, and this might have been a new term for some individuals, so I just want to clarify it. Nepotism. What is nepotism? Hiring relatives. Exactly. Yes, people are quick on that one. So, the practice of hiring relatives, potentially eliminating other potential candidates from consideration. So it's not saying that every organization cannot hire relatives, but you run into the risk of bias. So let's say if you have two potential candidates and they find out that the company hired a relative, they may, place a grievance or sort of call the company out and say this was an unfair hiring practice. In response to that, a lot of companies do actually have it stated that family members or couples cannot work at the same location or maybe the same office, maybe within the company, but just not working immediately together, just to avoid the risk of perceived nepotism and perceived conflict of interest. So, again, it's not like it's an illegal practice, but it can be certainly an unpreferred option for a company to be in, right? If they're called out on an unfair hiring practice. All right, cross training. What is cross training? I'm sure many of you have been through it in one way or another. Becoming a jack of all trades. Exactly. So training employees to do a variety of tasks and jobs. So the more cross trained an employee is, the more valuable that person is, right? So you've got an employee who can do 10 different tasks and all pretty efficiently. But again, now we start to get into that dangerous territory of an employer maybe focusing too much on one employee. They're cross training them up, getting them really skilled, but maybe you have, five other staff members who aren't getting any additional skills, right? So it's all about finding that balance. Cross training employees to make sure that they are professionally engaged and working on development and growth, but you're not becoming too reliant on that individual. Risk of burnout, what if they call in sick, all of that stuff. All right, and then we have two primary types of interviews, right? We have directive and non-directive. Let's start with directive. Predetermined protocol. Yeah, exactly. So it's an interview approach where the interview guides the discussion along a predetermined course. So it's very prescriptive. Maybe they have a form that they're reading exactly from, yes or no. It's very scripted in a way. So conversely, what's non-directive? Like a conversation. Exactly. So the interviewer asks open-ended questions and allows the applicant more freedom in response. It can be more time consuming. And another challenge with non-directive interviews is that as an employer, it can be harder to start sort of judging apples to apples. And again, I'd love to hear some of your your feedback. There's already a little bit of feedback in here. If you guys have preferences or your experiences with interviews, I do have one comment already. Someone does like the non-directive interview approach much more. Yeah, and I can totally see why. Non-directive interviews tend to take a more casual approach, right? So it's less intimidating right out of the gate. And it's often more like chit chat. It's a conversation. But again, one of the challenges, it can be more time consuming. And if because of its open-ended nature, a lot of employers may ask, sort of maybe one initial question, but based on how the conversation goes, maybe they don't get to, certain questions or they don't tick off certain skill sets that maybe they ended up asking other candidates. So it can be really hard to judge because now you're just chit-chatting. Maybe you guys just have a really great rapport and your chemistry is hitting it off and you just, I don't know, talk about sports or whatever, the local weather, who knows. But it becomes a little bit removed from the purpose of an interview, right? So that's why a blended approach is often one of the best methods for an interview, right? You have some directed qualities. It is prescriptive where you know you need to ask certain questions, but then you also leave the option for a non-directive opportunities. So the candidate can still answer more freely. So situational questions, as I'm sure many of you are used to throughout your co-op interviews, are becoming a lot more popular. So situational questions are really common in that typically a employer will ask a situation, an open-ended question. Oh, you're alone out in the field, your technology breaks down or your truck breaks down, no one's around to help you, what do you do? Right? It's the same question that every candidate will get asked, but it leaves it as an open-ended question for you to answer. And it shows, critical thinking ability, maybe draws on skills or knowledge, uh, just your general background information of the company, your procedures. So it's more easy to gauge answers, from one candidate to the other while still allowing that flexibility. And I do have a general question just for you guys. Have you had to do some interviews sort of remotely or online? Like how did it, if so, how was that connection? Or was it easier online? Was it harder to do it remotely? Just curious how it might have panned out for you. And if you had face to face, well, that's fantastic. And if you don't want to share, that's also fantastic. I was just curious how, in my personal experience, I've had one online pardon me, one online interview, and I found it more challenging simply because it can be really challenging to kind of look at the camera. It's harder to make eye contact, especially when you're sitting across from a table for another individual. I think body language is easier to interpret. There's a certain level of chemistry, right, and energy. But when it's remote, things can come across a lot more stale or a lot more forced. So for me, remote and sort of virtual interviews I found were a lot harder. Thankfully, I did only have one, but yeah, it was definitely an interesting experience. So after the successful hiring of an applicant, the supervisor should ensure the employee is properly socialized into a work group. So working groups allow the employees to work more closely together and, with other members of the team, and they depend on each other to complete tasks. And we'll get into work groups in another chapter, but what this is getting at is that employees should be properly socialized and integrated into the team, rather than saying, "Hey, fantastic, welcome aboard, have fun," and then you're left alone. Right? It can be really intimidating. It doesn't matter if you're a co-op student, it doesn't matter if you've got 10, 20 years of experience. That first day can be intimidating. So that's why that sort of socialization is really important. And supervisors should continually assess the skills and, pardon me, potential of existing employees and should provide opportunities for the ongoing development of employee skills. Now, I really want to highlight the fact of should. So yes, supervisors should be assessing your skill set or an employee's skill set and really promoting that professional and personal growth. In a perfect world, they would have well-defined and customized templates, or it's not templates, but customized plans laid out for you for your growth and your aspirations and your goals with the company. But in reality, that's rarely the case. Sometimes supervisors forget about professional growth, or it's really far off the mark and maybe doesn't align with your own personal goals. So, one of my biggest suggestions, and this is sort of off script here, but one of my biggest suggestions and what I've personally experienced is to not wait for anyone to develop your professional skill set or your personal skill set, right? Kind of take control of opportunities that are available. So, don't wait for a supervisor to say, "Hey, you're allowed to do this," or "Hey, would you like to do this?" If there is training that's out there or Webinars, I mean, some of it's free, some of it's really low cost. Just go for it. Any downtime you have, take advantage of any opportunity you can. If you wait for supervisors or if you wait for a company to develop you, they're only going to develop you sometimes based on what suits them best, not necessarily what suits you. For example, with Dylan Consulting, again, this isn't about running, companies through the mud or anything, but my mentor and I, didn't, we had two very different educational backgrounds, and she had a very different career path for me. And I was not really remotely interested in what she sort of was insisting that I do in terms of more education. So it felt really awkward to be in a position where sort of your employer and your supervisor saying, well, if you want to do training, you got to do this, you got to do that. Or, hey, whatever the case might be. Got to the point where I went to U of M and I talked to see what my options were, but I wasn't interested in any of that. Uh, so it's a really weird position to rely on others for your training or for your growth. So, long story short, just do your own research. There's so many resources out there, and it's stuff that you can always add to your resume, whether or not it's company provided or whether or not it's just you going out above and beyond and showing that initiative. So, I guess that's me up on the soapbox, but take control of your training and your growth, and you won't regret that aspect for sure. So, a couple of resources here at the end, and again, I will always post these slides to learn. But I do know that everyone's sort of in a different position right now. Some individuals are currently looking for positions, and some individuals may already have a job lined up, or maybe they've been there for a bit of time already and might be helping with interviews soon. So if you're currently an applicant and you're still looking for work, first off, that's okay. But here's a couple external links for writing an effective resume and tips for an effective interview as well, right? So these are just kind of generic and, in general. Now, if you're the interviewer, I also have a couple links here. So tips to ensure fair hiring practices, always important, and general interview practices as well as the employer. So if you're interested or you want to utilize some of these resources, go ahead and check them out. There's also a wealth of information online and through other resources as well. Okay, chapter 10 in a nutshell. Fantastic. So, and okay, 142. All right, we're still doing all right for time. Just make sure I'm on the right one here. Great. So I'm going to go through the alternative assignments. And I guess I'll first make a disclaimer if you happen to have read through the information already and you are absolutely positive you are going to be doing the discussion boards, go for it. You don't have to listen to this next section, right? So, because this will probably take about 20-ish or so minutes for me to go through. I'm going to go through each document in a lot of detail and answer questions if you have them. But if you've already read through the information, you're not really interested in this assignment, have a fantastic day. You're good to go. Be mindful of the deadline. But if you've maybe read through it and you have some questions or you're not too sure about things, stick around. This is going to be an opportunity to go through it and we'll go through it together. So yeah, if you already have your mind made up, have a great evening, enjoy the weather. If you haven't, stick around. All right, so let's start with content. So now there's going to be we're going to go to an alternative assignment here. There's going to be 3 different documents. So we have assignment information, supervisory assignment, and the rubric. And I'm going to go through each 3 like I mentioned. Pardon me. So let's start with supervisory assignment. And I'll blow this up on my screen as well. Okay, fantastic. So, sorry, I'm just going to grab some water. All right, that's a little bit better. Must be dry in my place today. Okay, so this assignment, company research. So this assignment, it's an opportunity to research a current company and assess their management and operating practices. This assignment will align with course-based content throughout the term, including management theories, conflict resolution practices, and maintaining employee motivation and engagement. So working individually, not a group assignment, you're to follow the template provided below to answer questions regarding a company of your choosing. So research will be conducted primarily, but it doesn't have to be exclusively to online resources. It was developed with, working remotely in mind, so you can do everything online. Your selected company can be private, public, nonprofit organizations, doesn't matter. But I do recommend that you select a company that best aligns with the provided questions and that you're interested in researching. It's just going to make it more enjoyable. So each question should be answered in complete sentences with proper spelling and sentence mechanics. So be mindful of how you're answering questions. Don't just kind of chicken scratch, four letters or four words together, right? Be mindful of how you answer things. Content. So research will involve providing company background, assessment of practices, conducting an industry interview to gain insight into management practices. It's recommended to select a company that is related to engineering technology, but it's not a requirement. So again, I do recommend that if you're interested in a certain company that maybe has municipal engineering services, do a profile on them, highlight that company, especially if you're looking for a position still. So if you're still kind of in that market for finding a job, this this assignment could be a really cool way to sort of make a relationship between you and that company. So each of the four parts are provided in the template below, and a rubric is provided in a separate attachment. We'll go through that. Please review the rubric in full before completing the assignment. So I will kind of put a disclaimer here at the beginning. I know it might seem like a lot of work, but what this one assignment is it's replacing 4 discussion board posts, right? So 4 weeks worth of, regular work. So that's why there's sort of 4 parts to it, is just to replace that level of work. So there's 4 parts. The due date is the last class before your final exam. So it's the exact same due date as the last discussion board post. So it's due at 11:30 p.m. So everyone, regardless of what you do, you follow the same deadline. Now, here are also some recommended organizations if you can't find a suitable one, that you're liking, or maybe there's not enough transparent information online. You could do Loblaws, Dillon Consulting, Republic Architecture, McDonald's, and Acadia Center, which is, I believe, a nonprofit organization. So just a handful there if you're really struggling with selecting. So let's start with part 1. So part 1, company profile. Provide a company profile, including details on the company, such as number of locations, number of employees, recent revenue, if that's disclosed, products and services provided, explain the industry it works in, and identify or provide some background on the CEO. So really just provided backgrounds of what this company is, what they do, where they are. That's what I'm looking for. And then provide the website URL for the company, just so that I can kind of also look at the company and, kind of fact check, make sure that things line up. So second part of this second question here, what are the company vision and mission statements? Do they appropriately reflect the services in the industry? Why or why not? If you cannot find a mission and vision statement posted online, please create one that aligns with your company's service. So that goes back for me saying, try to select a company that can kind of fit into these questions well. If you have a company that has their mission and vision statement posted kind of plainly for everyone to see, perfect, it's copy and paste. If you happen to select a company that doesn't have those readily available, that's okay. It just means you have to make something up, right? Put a little effort into it, right? I can only mark what you have provided, but that's what I'm just saying is try to make it as less work as you have to, right? All right, so, and then my apologies, I can update this, but this is part 2, corporate culture. So based on research, and again, this is just going to be on looking at their website, right? This is sort of the initial perception or initial reaction you have. What does the corporate culture appear to be like? Identify and briefly discuss company initiatives that have been developed to improve diversity, employee morale or motivation, and health and wellness, right? So there's different ways that we can improve employee motivation. So if no initiatives are listed through your company, again, very similar to the mission and vision statement, suggest 3 programs that would support the betterment of employee and workplace culture. So current to parent culture, maybe just based on how their website's set up, maybe they have a blog where they talk about employee of the month or how fantastic their employees are, or their employee spotlight, right? That's pretty cool. Talk about that. If they have absolutely nothing that talks about their employees, then maybe again, this is a parent culture. This doesn't talk about the actual working environment, but it's perceived as a member of the public. So current to parent culture, maybe it needs some improvement. And if they don't have any obvious initiative listed, create some, right? Health and wellness initiative. Nothing was listed. So companies should suggest, maybe a $200 annual subsidy for gym memberships or group activity sessions, right? Employee morale initiative. Companies should highlight that they get together once a month for a beer tasting event. Doesn't matter. Point being is use the information that's provided to you. And if that information is not provided, create something. All right, now on to part 3, company operations. So there are 4 building blocks of competitive advantage: efficiency, innovation, quality, and responsiveness to customers. Based on your research, rank each category from highly achieved, which is 1, to not apparently achieved. That's a 4. Provide a brief description of your top category and how that company meets the standard, and a description of the bottom category and how the company could better convey this information to the public. So this top part here, so let's say you're looking at a company, maybe they happen to be a surveying company. Maybe for innovation, you give them a 1. They're talking in depth about all the technology they use. They have drones and this cutting edge technologies. It's cool. Give that a 1 and give me a brief explanation of that proof of top performing category. Tell me about it. But maybe on their website, they have no information about dealing with clients or how they maintain client relationships. It's not saying they don't, but there's no information there. So let's give responsiveness a 4. So what is your recommendation? Well, maybe they should have a page on their website about how they maintain customer relationships, or whatever the case might be, right? So again, a little bit of brain power and creative thinking for this assignment. But again, it can be as wild or as reasonable as you want. All right, so part 4, and this is the one that I want to mention that although it's kind of listed as part 4, if you are doing this assignment, I would recommend starting the wheels on part 4 first. So regardless of your company research, let's say you picked, let's say you picked McDonald's, whatever the case might be. I do strongly encourage you to conduct this this interview with an individual that represents your industry. So it's a great way of establishing networking. So let's say you decide to do a profile on McDonald's, but then for an industry interview, I really do recommend maybe trying to make a connection with KGS or somebody from Dillon Consulting or somebody from Barnes and Duncan. Doesn't matter. Somebody from the industry, especially like I said, if you are still applying for jobs, this can be a fantastic way to reach out to a company and say, hey, I'm doing an assignment for one of my courses where I'm reaching out to a supervisor just to gain some insight for, their experiences and, their projects in the industry, right? It has nothing to do with a job. Do not drop the J word. Don't say I'm looking for a job. But just use this as a stepping stool to establish that connection. Pardon me, can't talk today. Establish that connection. And I have also seen this work. While I was at Dillon Consulting, there was a student who reached out to the project managers and said, "Hey, I was doing some research and I found this and this project very intriguing. Could I come in and maybe chat about it a bit more?" And it had nothing to do with applying for a job. There was no current ad posted, but sure enough, when a job ad did come up, that student was first on the list. Right, that connection was already made, and the company knew that that person was interested. So you can use this as that tool. And that being said, it's not a requirement to use an industry connection. So if you're currently working at Boston Pizza or Walmart, wherever, you could still use a supervisor that you currently work with. It's just sort of an encouragement to use an industry connection. But there is absolute value in supervisors from all walks of life and from all industries. So you can use whoever. And I do have sort of 12 sort of set questions here, but if you'd like to expand on this, you are certainly encouraged to, and see where the conversation takes you. Industry interview, it can take, you can do it virtually, you can do it on the phone, depending on the industry. Maybe they want to have it in person, or you can do it through email, right? I think virtually or phone or in person is probably the best for establishing connections. But if you happen to do it through email, you're not going to lose marks, but it just might not be as effective for establishing. So that's the overall template, right? So there's 1, 2, 3, and 4. Are there any questions right now? Okay, I'm not seeing anything in the chat. And again, if anything comes up, please ask. And like I said, I would just recommend, if you're doing this assignment, get the industry interview started. Maybe kind of reach out to certain companies initially, because they might need a week or two to get back to you, right? Just based on their schedule. And you don't want to save it right till the last minute. Then you're going to be scrambling, and nobody wants that. Want to be very minimal stress. All right, so that is the first part. And now I do say kind of right on this landing page here, if you plan to complete this assignment in lieu of the discussion boards, again, this assignment replaces all 4 remaining discussion board posts, including the one due tonight, please email me by 11:30 p.m. March 25th, which is tonight. I'm going to get into the why in a moment, but just before we get into some, kind of common questions, I am going to talk about the rubric. There's 2 important aspects on this rubric that I want to highlight. All right, so first off, very standard rubric for what you might see for, for other assignments, marked on submission, like your language, your grammar. Each part is broken down to, how thoroughly developed it is. Did you give me 1 sentence to work off of versus, a thorough and a solid answer, that kind of stuff. But there's 2 rows here. One is communication. So if you communicated your intent to complete this assignment before 11:30 p.m. tonight, easy 4 marks, 4 out of 4. That's all you have to do is send me an email. Hey, I'm going to do this assignment. That's all I need. Now, if you send me that email after 11:30 p.m. tonight, but before you hand it in, so before the end of the term, 2 out of 4, you lose a couple marks. And if you did not send me any email, 0 out of 4. So easy 4 marks to get, okay? And the last one down here is completed discussion board post for second half of term. So that's the second half, that's what we're in right now. So if you completed 0 discussion board posts, that's what you want. You want 0 marks. You want 0 out of -8. This row can cost you marks. If you also completed 1 discussion board, 2, 3, or 4, you're going to be losing marks depending on how many you completed. The whole point of this assignment is to replace the work that you would do for a discussion board post. So I don't want you to go in, do all the work for the discussion boards, then all the work for this assignment. That also means that I am going in and I'm marking, I'm giving feedback. So everyone's kind of doubling up on effort, and we don't want that. That's inefficient use of time. So don't complete any discussion board posts. You want a 0 in this category, and send me an email by 11:30 p.m. tonight. You want a 4. Those are very easy marks to adhere to. Now, if you happen to be sitting in on this, this portion where I'm going through information, and let's say you're thinking to yourself, oh, shoot, I do want to do this assignment now, but I've already, did the discussion board, just, maybe you're used to working ahead. That is okay. In that case, I would still like you to send me an email, but just quickly indicate, hey, I did do a discussion board, in advance, right? Maybe I didn't know all the details, whatever the case might be. Just let me know. Do not go in and delete your post, because I don't want it to affect any other classmates. Maybe they've already replied to you, and if you delete it, then that might ruin their work as well. So just send me an email. Hey, that's okay. I understand that happens. That's why I'm going through it now. Otherwise, yeah, just send me an email and we'll move forward with whatever your option is. If you don't send me an email, it is assumed you're sticking with the discussion boards. Okay, so if you're doing that, you don't need to do anything. If you want to do the assignment, very quick email. Now the last thing I'm going to show you is just sort of some frequently asked questions. And these will just kind of go through maybe some of the questions you have on your mind that maybe you haven't asked quite yet. So once again, I just reiterate, if the assignment interests you, please email me by 11:30 p.m. tonight. Let's go through some of these questions. Why was the assignment created? Well, this course, like every other course you're taking, it's always being developed to better suit the needs of students. And as a response to feedback and the remote nature of this course, I recognize that there are some challenges associated with discussion board requirements, right? You have to post it, then you have to go back to respond. And I do know the challenges of sort of relying on others, right? It's essentially like group work, but it's always a lot of back and forth. So this is an assignment for independent work, and you can just kind of, put your head down and focus on it. So that's why. What is it worth? So it's worth 12.5%, which is the exact same value of your remaining 4 discussion boards. So it's the exact same. How will the marks be displayed in Learn? So a new section will be created in your grades called Assignment 1. If you choose to complete the discussion boards, you'll be exempt from Assignment 1 category. Conversely, if you choose to do the assignment, you'll be exempt from the discussion board posts. So either way, you'll just see an exempt. Can I complete a portion of the discussion boards and, a portion, or can I also complete this assignment? No, no. This assignment was designed to be completed in its entirety, and I ask that you choose one option, so discussion boards or assignment, that best aligns with your schedule and your interests. Up until this point, you do know the complexity and the nature of these discussion boards, and that complexity is going to remain the same right up until the end. So if you're not having an issue with the schedule and you are enjoying the concept of discussion boards, fantastic. I'm glad that they're aligning with what you enjoy. Keep up with it. I mean, this class is kind of killing it when it comes to discussion boards. You guys are doing really good. So if you want to stick with it, thumbs up. If you want to change a pace, this was made for you. So what happens if I complete the discussion boards weekly and then hand in this assignment? Please don't. As I said, it's extra work for you, it's extra work for me, and nobody wants that. So review the assignment rubric. And as I mentioned, there is a penalty associated with completing both the discussion boards and the assignment. If the discussion boards and the assignments are handed in, so the assignment mark will stand and contribute to your final grade, right? So this is not an opportunity for doing the discussion board post and maybe you want a GPA booster or something. No, it's just pick one or the other, please. So I'd like to keep doing the discussion boards, but with potentially less people, what if no one comments on the topic I selected? Don't worry. I mean, first off, you guys as a municipal group, you are a very large group. I don't see that being an issue. However, since day one, I do check each discussion board by midday on the due date, so Thursday at midday, to ensure that there's at least 2 students in each category, so in each topic. If there aren't, I will post to ensure that you have an opportunity to provide a reply. That hasn't been needed yet, again, just due to sheer numbers. But if for some reason an overwhelming amount of this class wants to do the assignment and maybe only a small amount of students continue on with the discussion boards, again, it doesn't look like that's the case, but uh, you would still have opportunities to get your full marks on the discussion boards. And so why do I have to tell you if I'm completing the assignment? So there's actually a few reasons. One, it ensures accountability and awareness of expectations. It means you've read the information in the instructions. But 2, I can exempt your marks earlier rather than later, which really helps streamline my duties. And that's all part and parcel of getting the marks to you as early and as fast as possible. And 3, and probably the most important, if I know you're completing the assignments, I won't be following up with you every single week saying, hey, there's no discussion board, 0, 0. Why aren't you doing a discussion board? And then I can more effectively support you in doing this assignment, right? Maybe helping you find contact for industry, or if you have specific questions, I can just more effectively support you. And so when does this due? Pardon me. Same time as your last discussion board post, which is 11:30 p.m. on Monday. Oh, sorry, I need to update that. It would be your Thursday. So I believe that would be April 25th. My apologies. This carried over from the Monday class. Oh no, it is Thursday, April 22nd. So it is still April 22nd, but it will be a Thursday. So same as your discussion board post. I'll make sure that gets revised. And so can I hand this assignment in early? Yes. I can absolutely understand wanting to work ahead, especially this year more than ever. You've probably got a lot of things coming down the pipeline as we get into the end of April. So this assignment can be submitted anytime, but I'm not going to mark it and release marks until the due date, right? Just to maintain fairness for all students who are completing this work. So hand it in whenever you want, but the marks don't come till the end. And can I pick any company for this assignment? Yes, just as a reiteration, any company is acceptable. But to maintain relatedness and interest, it is recommended you find a company that's from the industry. But you can complete a profile in the company you worked for as well, so that is an option. And if you're seeking employment, this is a great opportunity to reach out to companies to get further information and establish that connection. And finally, is this a group assignment? No, please complete it individually. So those were just some of the general questions I could think of, if I was sort of in your role. But are there any other questions? Do you need any further clarity, or do you need anything else right now as we talk about it? I know there's still a handful of students listening in, so any questions? Okay. So I don't see anything in the chat, which either means it was perfectly clear or really, really confusing and you're trying to process everything. Um, like I said, if you're contemplating this assignment or you're leaning towards it, just send me an email by 11:30 p.m. tonight. If you've already done the discussion board, in that email, just say, I did do discussion board this week and I will still exempt you, okay? But don't go in and delete that discussion board because I don't want other students' work to be affected. Otherwise, that's the overview of the assignment. I hope some or all of you find that interesting or exciting. Uh, Otherwise, that's all I had for this afternoon. It's shortly after 2, so looks pretty nice out. Hopefully get a chance to go outside and enjoy the weather. Gonna stop recording. There we go. Okay, so again, that's all I had planned. If you maybe have other questions related to the course or whatever, you can stick around. I'll stick around on this line, but you guys are free to go.